The dust swirled around Martha's worn boots as she approached the sprawling ranch house, her heart pounding with each hesitant step. The wooden structure stood like a fortress against the harsh New Mexico landscape, its weathered walls telling stories of countless seasons under the unforgiving sun. She clutched her 7-year-old son Miguel's hand tighter, feeling his small fingers trembling in her grasp. The boy's dark eyes darted nervously between his mother and the imposing building before them. Sensing her fear even though he didn't fully understand their desperate situation, Thomas McKenna stood on his porch, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching the approaching figures with careful attention. At 52, he had learned to read people quickly in this untamed territory. The woman moved with the cautious grace of someone who had known hardship, while the child stayed close to her side like a shadow. Thomas could see the Apache features in both of them, the high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that marked their heritage. In 1887, tensions between the Apache people and white settlers remained high, making this unexpected visit all the more intriguing. Martha had walked 15 miles from the reservation, her threadbare shawl offering little protection against the morning chill. She had heard whispers about the tall rancher who treated his workers fairly, who didn't judge a person by the color of their skin or the blood that ran through their veins. These stories had given her the courage to make this journey, though now, standing before his home, doubt crept into her mind like poison. Miguel pressed closer to his mother's leg, his stomach growling loudly enough for Thomas to hear from the porch. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife, revealing the true reason for their visit. Thomas had seen that hollow look in a child's eyes before, the way hunger carved shadows into young faces and stole the light from innocent smiles. His own childhood had known similar struggles before his father built this ranch from nothing but determination and sweat. "Ma'am," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the yard without threat or judgment. "Mighty early for visitors. Something I can help you with?" Martha stopped 20 feet from the porch, her pride warring with her desperation. She had rehearsed these words during the long walk, but now they stuck in her throat like thorns. Miguel looked up at her with those trusting eyes, the same eyes that had watched their meager food supplies dwindle to nothing over the past week. The reservation's government rations had been delayed again, leaving families like hers to survive on hope and empty promises. "Please, Senator," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My son, he needs food. I can work. I'm strong. I can clean, cook, tend animals. Please, I ask nothing for myself, only for him." Thomas studied her face, seeing the fierce maternal love that burned there despite her obvious exhaustion. He had known many Apache families during his years in this territory, had traded with them, even fought alongside some during the Indian Wars. He understood the complex web of politics and prejudice that had forced proud people onto reservations, stripping them of their traditional hunting grounds and leaving them dependent on government handouts that rarely came on time. The rancher set down his coffee cup and descended the porch steps slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He had learned long ago that sudden gestures could be misinterpreted, especially by people who had learned to expect violence from strangers. As he drew closer, he could see the careful mending in Martha's dress, the way she had tried to make herself presentable despite having so little to work with. "What's the boy's name?" Thomas asked, crouching down to Miguel's eye level. "Miguel," Martha answered quickly, as if speaking his name might somehow protect him. "Miguel," Thomas repeated, offering the child a gentle smile. "That's a strong name. You hungry, son?" The boy nodded solemnly, his small hand never leaving his mother's. Thomas could see intelligence in those dark eyes, a quick awareness that spoke of a child who had learned to read situations for signs of danger or safety. It reminded him of his own son at that age, always watching, always learning. "I got some fresh biscuits in the kitchen," Thomas said, standing up and addressing Martha directly. "And there's bacon from yesterday's breakfast. Boy could use some meat on those bones." Martha's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I can pay with work," she insisted. "I don't take charity. My grandmother taught me to earn what I receive." Wasn't offering charity, Thomas replied matter-of-factly. Was offering a meal in exchange for conversation. Been living alone out here too long. Could use some company while I eat my breakfast. This simple reframing meant everything to Martha. It preserved her dignity while acknowledging her son's need. She nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like a silent agreement. Thomas led them toward the house, noting how Martha's eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, cataloging exits and potential threats. It was a habit born of necessity, the survival instinct of a people who had learned to trust cautiously. The interior of the ranch house surprised Martha with its cleanliness and warmth. Heavy wooden furniture filled the main room, and a large stone fireplace dominated one wall. Family photographs sat on the mantel, showing a younger Thomas with a woman and child. Martha noticed the dust-free surfaces, the carefully maintained order that spoke of a man who took pride in his home. Despite living alone, Thomas busied himself in the kitchen, pulling out leftover biscuits and slicing thick pieces of bacon. The smell of food made Miguel's stomach growl again, and Martha felt her own hunger respond despite her attempts to ignore it. She had given the boy her portion of their last meal 2 days ago, telling him she wasn't hungry when her stomach felt like it was eating itself. "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "Both of you. No point in standing on ceremony when there's food getting cold." Martha hesitated only a moment before helping Miguel into a chair and taking the seat beside him. Thomas placed heaping plates in front of them, the portions generous enough to satisfy even grown men who had worked hard all day. Miguel looked to his mother for permission before touching the food, his training in politeness overriding even his hunger. "Go ahead, Mio," Martha whispered. And Miguel began eating with the careful control of a child who had learned not to waste a single crumb. Thomas poured fresh milk into a glass for Miguel and coffee for Martha, then sat across from them with his own modest portion. He ate slowly, giving them time to satisfy their immediate hunger without feeling rushed or judged. The kitchen filled with comfortable silence, broken only by the gentle sounds of eating and the distant lowing of cattle in the pastures. As Miguel's plate emptied, color began to return to his pale cheeks. Thomas watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction, remembering how his own mother had insisted on feeding any hungry person who came to their door. "Food is medicine for more than just the body," she used to say, and Thomas had never forgotten those words. "You said you could work?" Thomas said eventually, his tone conversational. "What kind of work you done before?" Martha wiped Miguel's face with a clean cloth Thomas had provided, her movements tender and practiced. "I worked in the big house at Fort Apache before—" She paused, the memories clearly painful. "Before my husband died. I cleaned, cooked for the officers' families. I know how to manage a household, how to preserve food, tend a garden." "Husband was a scout?" Thomas asked gently. "Yes, he rode with Captain Crawford's unit. Good man, spoke 3 languages, knew every trail between here and Mexico." Pride and grief warred in her voice. "Pneumonia took him last winter. The medicine came too late to the reservation." Thomas nodded, understanding the subtext. Medical care for reservation Indians often came as an afterthought, if at all. He had seen too many good people die from treatable illnesses simply because help arrived too late or not at all. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "A scout's work is dangerous. Takes courage to ride into unknown territory." Martha appreciated that he didn't offer empty platitudes or false comfort. His acknowledgement of her husband's courage meant more than lengthy condolences would have. Miguel had finished eating and now sat quietly, his small hand resting on his full belly with obvious contentment. "Got a proposition for you," Thomas said, leaning back in his chair. "My housekeeper left last month to get married. Been doing my own cooking and cleaning, but I'm not much good at either. House is starting to show it, and my cooking would kill a man stronger than me." Martha's eyes sharpened with interest, but she remained cautious. "What kind of proposition?" "You and the boys stay here, you handle the house and cooking. I pay fair wages, provide room and board. Miguel can help with light chores when he's not studying." "Studying?" Martha asked, confused. "Boy needs education." Can't have him growing up not knowing his letters and numbers. There's a school in town, but it's too far for daily travel. I got books here, taught my own boy before. He gestured toward the photographs on the mantel. Martha followed his gaze, seeing the progression of images that told a story of family and loss. The woman in the photos had kind eyes and a gentle smile, while the boy grew from toddler to young man across the span of pictures. She noticed that the most recent photos showed Thomas alone. "Where are they now?" she asked softly. "Cholera, 5 years back." 3 weeks had passed since Martha and Miguel first crossed the threshold of the McKenna ranch, and the house had indeed come alive with the sounds Thomas had longed to hear. Miguel's laughter echoed from the stables each morning as he helped with the horses, while Martha's humming drifted from the kitchen as she prepared meals that filled the house with warmth and wonderful aromas. The change in both woman and child was remarkable. Proper food and rest had restored Miguel's energy and curiosity, while Martha had regained the confident bearing of a woman who knew her worth. Thomas found himself looking forward to meal times in a way he hadn't since Mary's death. Martha's cooking combined traditional Apache techniques with recipes she had learned at Fort Apache, creating flavors that were both exotic and comforting. She prepared venison with wild herbs that made the meat taste like something from a fancy restaurant. And her bread was so light and flavorful that Thomas often caught himself eating far more than he should. The arrangement was working better than any of them had dared hope. But Thomas knew that their real test would come when they ventured into Copper Creek for the first time. The town's attitude toward Indians ranged from suspicious to openly hostile, and while Thomas commanded respect as one of the area's largest landowners, that respect might not extend to protecting his Apache employees from prejudice on a crisp Thursday morning. Thomas hitched the wagon and announced it was time for their trip to town. Miguel needed winter clothes and school supplies, while Martha required fabric to sew proper work dresses and household items that would make their life more comfortable. The boy's excitement was infectious as he climbed into the wagon beside his mother, his eyes bright with anticipation of his first real adventure beyond the ranch boundaries. The ride to Copper Creek took 2 hours across rolling hills dotted with mesquite and juniper trees. Thomas used the time to explain the layout of the town and introduce Martha and Miguel to the personalities they would encounter. He was particularly careful to describe Sheriff Williams, a fair man who enforced the law without regard to skin color, and Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store with her husband and had a reputation for treating all customers with equal courtesy. "There's some folks in town who might not be friendly at first," Thomas explained as they approached the outskirts of Copper Creek. "They don't know you like I do, so they might make judgments based on fear or ignorance. Best thing to do is be polite, but don't let anyone make you feel small. You work for me, and that means something around here." Martha nodded, her hand smoothing Miguel's hair as she prepared him for what might be their first real test. "Remember what we practiced, Mio? Stand straight, look people in the eye, and speak clearly when spoken to. Your father was proud of his Apache blood, and you should be too." The town of Copper Creek sprawled along both sides of a dusty main street lined with wooden buildings that housed everything from the bank to the saloon. People moved along the boardwalks with the unhurried pace of a community that measured time by seasons rather than hours. Thomas parked the wagon in front of Henderson's general store and helped Martha and Miguel down, noting how conversations seemed to pause as people recognized his companions inside the store. Mrs. Henderson looked up from arranging bolts of fabric, with a welcoming smile that faltered slightly when she saw Martha and Miguel. Thomas had expected this reaction and moved quickly to establish the situation before misunderstandings could develop. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Thomas said warmly. "Like you to meet Martha and Miguel? They're working at my place now. Martha's the finest housekeeper this side of the Rio Grande, and young Miguel here is learning to be quite the horseman." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted as she processed this information. The fact that Thomas had introduced them by name and spoken of them with obvious respect immediately changed the dynamic. She had known Thomas McKenna for over a decade and trusted his judgment implicitly. "Pleased to meet you both," Mrs. Henderson said, her natural kindness overriding any initial hesitation. "What can I help you find today?" Martha stepped forward with quiet dignity. "We need winter clothes for Miguel and some fabric for household items. Mr. McKenna has been generous, but we want to purchase quality goods that will last." The mention of purchasing rather than seeking charity or credit further elevated Martha in Mrs. Henderson's estimation. Here was a woman who took pride in paying her own way, a virtue highly valued in frontier communities. Mrs. Henderson began pulling down bolts of sturdy cotton and wool, explaining the merits of each fabric with the enthusiasm of someone who truly loved her trade. Dell wandered toward a display of penny candy, his eyes wide at the colorful array of sweets he had never imagined. Thomas noticed the boy's interest and quietly approached Mrs. Henderson. "Put together a small bag of mixed candy for the boy," he said softly. "Early wage payment." While Martha examined fabrics and discussed prices, Thomas and Miguel explored the rest of the store. The boy was fascinated by everything from the pickle barrel to the display of pocket knives, asking questions with the curiosity of someone encountering an entire world for the first time. Thomas enjoyed playing teacher, explaining the purpose of various tools and supplies while building the kind of relationship that develops naturally between a man and a boy who have found mutual respect. Their peaceful shopping was interrupted when Jake Morrison pushed through the store's front door with the aggressive swagger of a man looking for trouble. Morrison owned a smaller ranch east of town and had a reputation for drinking too much and sharing his opinions too freely. His eyes immediately fixed on Martha and Miguel with the kind of hostile stare that made children hide behind their mother's skirts. "Well, well," Morrison said loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "Tom McKenna's got himself some Indian help. Thought you had better sense than to bring their kind into town." The store fell silent except for the ticking of the large clock behind the counter. Thomas felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of confrontation he had hoped to avoid, but now that it had arrived, he needed to handle it correctly to establish boundaries that would protect Martha and Miguel in future encounters. "Jake," Thomas said evenly, "Martha and Miguel are members of my household. I'd appreciate you speaking of them with the same respect you'd show any other decent folks." Morrison snorted derisively. "Decent folks? Tom, these people are savages. Everyone knows what the Apache did during the wars. You can't trust them not to slit your throat in your sleep." Martha's face remained impassive, but Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders. The way her hand moved protectively toward Miguel. The boy pressed closer to his mother, his earlier excitement replaced by confusion and fear. Thomas felt anger building in his chest like steam in a boiler, but he channeled it into cold determination rather than hot words. "The Apache Wars ended over a year ago," Thomas said quietly. "And if you know anything about those conflicts, you know there were good and bad people on both sides. Martha's husband served as a scout for the U.S. Army. He risked his life to keep settlers safe, which is more than some folks around here can claim. Once a savage, always a savage," Morrison insisted, emboldened by his own rhetoric. "Mark my words, Tom, you'll regret trusting them. Probably planning right now to rob you blind and disappear in the night." That was the line Thomas would not allow to be crossed. He moved with surprising speed for such a large man, closing the distance between himself and Morrison until they stood face to face. Thomas stood 6 inches taller and outweighed the other man by at least 50 pounds, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had never backed down from a fight. "Jake, I'm going to give you one chance to apologize to Martha and Miguel for your discourtesy. After that, we're going to step outside and settle this the way men do when words aren't sufficient." Morrison's bluster evaporated as he realized Thomas was serious. The bigger man had a reputation as someone who didn't make threats he wasn't prepared to carry out, and Morrison suddenly remembered several stories about Thomas's military service during the Indian Wars. Fighting a man like Thomas McKenna over a principle would likely result in a painful lesson that Morrison wasn't eager to learn. Morrison stammered. looking around the store for support that didn't materialize. Mrs. Henderson was staring at him with obvious disapproval, while other customers had found sudden interest in examining merchandise rather than meeting his eyes. "The apology?" "Jake," Thomas prompted, his voice still dangerously quiet. "Sorry," Morrison mumbled in Martha and Miguel's general direction. "Didn't mean nothing personal by it?" Martha inclined her head graciously, understanding that forcing a more complete apology would only create additional problems. "Apology accepted," she said with dignity that made Morrison look even smaller by comparison. Morrison practically ran from the store, and gradually normal conversation resumed as people processed what they had witnessed. Thomas's defense of his employees had been noted by everyone present, and word would spread quickly through the community that Martha and Miguel were under his protection. It was exactly the kind of public statement Thomas had hoped he wouldn't need to make, but now that it was done, 6 months had transformed the McKenna Ranch into something none of them had expected when Martha first approached with her desperate plea. The house thrummed with life and purpose, filled with the sounds of Miguel practicing his lessons at the kitchen table while Martha prepared elaborate meals that had Thomas looking forward to dinner like a man half his age. The boy had grown taller and stronger, his confidence blooming under the combined influences of good nutrition, education, and Thomas's patient mentoring. Miguel's success at school had exceeded everyone's expectations. Miss Patterson reported that he was among her brightest students, particularly excelling in mathematics and geography. The initial wariness of other children had given way to genuine friendships as Miguel proved himself through kindness and quick wit rather than fighting or defensiveness. He had even been chosen to represent the school in the regional spelling competition, an honor that filled both Martha and Thomas with enormous pride. The changing seasons had brought their own challenges and rewards. Thomas had taught Miguel to ride properly, and the boy had developed an almost mystical connection with the horses that amazed even experienced ranch hands. He seemed to understand their moods and needs intuitively, calming nervous animals with a touch and earning the respect of men who had worked with horses their entire lives. Martha's role had evolved far beyond that of a simple housekeeper. She had become Thomas's trusted advisor on everything from menu planning for cattle drives to managing the household budget. Her intelligence and practical wisdom impressed him daily, and he found himself consulting her on ranch decisions that went far beyond her official responsibilities. She had also begun teaching him basic Apache phrases, claiming it was only fair since he was helping educate her son in English literature and mathematics. The real test of their unconventional family came on a cold February morning when Dr. Samuel Richardson arrived at the ranch with news that would change everything. Thomas had known Richardson for years, trusting him as both a skilled physician and a man of unshakable integrity. When the doctor requested a private conversation, Martha immediately offered to take Miguel to the stables, but Thomas asked them both to stay. "Sam, whatever you have to say concerns all of us," Thomas said, gesturing for everyone to sit around the kitchen table. "Martha and Miguel are family. They have a right to hear whatever's brought you out here on such a bitter morning." Dr. Richardson removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a habit Martha had learned indicated serious news. "Thomas, I have received some disturbing information through military channels. There's talk of moving the Apache from their current reservation to lands in Oklahoma. The government wants to consolidate tribes to reduce administrative costs and open up more territory for white settlement." Martha felt her blood turn to ice. The Oklahoma relocations had been devastating for other tribes, separating families and forcing people to abandon everything familiar for unknown hardships hundreds of miles away. Many who made those forced journeys never survived the trip, while others died slowly of heartbreak and despair in their new prisons. "When?" Thomas asked tersely. "Orders could come any day. The situation is fluid, but my sources suggest it's more a matter of when than if. I wanted to warn you because I know how much Martha and Miguel mean to you, and because there might be ways to prevent them from being included in any relocation." Miguel pressed closer to his mother, Not fully understanding the adult conversation but sensing the fear and tension in the room, Martha's mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. How could she protect her son from a government that saw Apache people as problems to be moved around rather than human beings with rights and feelings? What kind of ways? Thomas asked, his voice taking on the hard edge Martha had heard only once before. During the confrontation with Jake Morrison, Dr. Richardson glanced around the table, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to suggest. Legal adoption would place Miguel under your protection as a white citizen. The boy would be safe from relocation, but Martha... He left the sentence unfinished, the implications hanging in the air like smoke. No, Martha said firmly before anyone could respond. I will not save my son by abandoning him. We stay together or we face whatever comes together. Thomas studied her face, seeing the fierce maternal love that had brought her to his door 6 months ago, now refined by security and strengthened by hope. He had come to love both Martha and Miguel, though he had been careful not to express those feelings in ways that might make them uncomfortable. Now, facing the possibility of losing them, he realized how central they had become to his happiness and sense of purpose. There might be another way, Thomas said slowly, an idea forming as he spoke. Marriage would make Martha a white citizen automatically, and Miguel would be her son by an American citizen married to an American rancher. The government couldn't touch either of them. The silence that followed this suggestion stretched until it became almost unbearable. Martha stared at Thomas with wide eyes, trying to determine whether he was offering a marriage of convenience or something more. Miguel looked back and forth between the adults, sensing that something momentous was being decided but not understanding what. Thomas, Martha said carefully, you would do this to protect us? I'd do it because I love you, Thomas replied simply. Both of you. This house became a home again the day you walked into it, and I can't imagine going back to the emptiness I lived with before. If marriage is what it takes to keep you safe, then I'm asking you to marry me for all the right reasons, not just the practical ones. Martha felt tears she had held back for months finally begin to fall. She had grown to love Thomas McKenna with a quiet, steady devotion that had crept up on her like sunrise, so gradually that she hadn't realized it was happening until this moment when she might lose everything again. He was a good man who treated her as an equal, who respected her intelligence and valued her opinions, who had shown her son the kind of father's love Miguel deserved. And if I said yes? Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Would this be a real marriage? With love and respect and everything that means? It would be the most real thing in my life, Thomas assured her. I'm not asking you to pretend to be someone you're not or to abandon your Apache heritage. I'm asking you to be my wife and Miguel's stepfather and to build a life together that honors both of our cultures. Dr. Richardson cleared his throat tactfully. I could perform the ceremony this afternoon if you're both certain. As a minister as well as a physician, I'm authorized to conduct marriages. The sooner it's legal and recorded, the safer you'll all be if the relocation orders come through. Martha looked at Miguel, who was watching her with complete trust in her judgment. This boy had already lost his father and faced the possibility of losing everything else he held dear. Now she had the power to give him security, education, and the love of a man who would guide him into adulthood with wisdom and patience. Miguel, she said in Apache, Thomas wants to become your new father and my husband. This would mean you would be safe from the government men who want to move our people far away. What do you think? Miguel considered this with the seriousness of someone much older than his 8 years. He looked at Thomas with calculating eyes, weighing everything he had learned about this man over the past months. Thomas had never lied to him, never broken a promise, never shown him anything but kindness and respect. Most importantly, Thomas made his mother smile in ways Miguel hadn't seen since his father's death. I think, Miguel said carefully in English, that Thomas is already like a father to me. If he wants to make it official, I would be honored to be his son. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion at the boy's formal acceptance. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Miguel's smaller one. I would be proud to call you son, Miguel. and I promise I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of that trust." Martha wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders with decision. "Then yes, Thomas McKenna, I will marry you. For love, for safety, for the future we can build together." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and nervous excitement. Martha bathed and dressed in her finest dress, a blue cotton garment she had sewn herself that brought out the color of her eyes and complemented her dark hair. Thomas shaved carefully and put on his best suit, the one he had worn to church with Mary years ago, now pressed into service for a very different but equally important ceremony. Miguel served as ring-bearer and witness, standing between his soon-to-be parents with solemn dignity as Dr. Richardson performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony in the ranch house parlor. Thomas had given Martha his mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band that fit perfectly and seemed to symbolize the way she had filled the empty spaces in his life. "Do you, Thomas McKenna, take Martha Santos to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and honor and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Thomas said, his voice strong and sure. "Do you, Martha Santos, take Thomas McKenna to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and honor and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Martha replied, meaning every word.